I'm going to be doing a thing called Bits and Pieces later on of stuff I forgot and can't remember, but I forgot to mention when we were a 5-piece doing all those Let's Go shows, we used to go into the CBC studios, into the wardrobe part, and try on all these neat outfits. That some of the shows we wore kind of outfit. I sort of wore a pirate's outfit once, and also at one time the Northwest Company, I think we were a trio then, but we used to rehearse at a place called Watts clothing rental store down on 7th Avenue or 4th Avenue, and I think it was 7th Avenue. And we rehearsed upstairs. On one side of the top floor was the rehearsal spot, and the other side was just full of all these costumes. And we would go in there and try all these different outfits. They had it all for movies. It was really neat. Anyway, this is probably the best time of my life, pretty near, was the 3-piece of the Northwest Company when we finally, Vidar left the band, and him and Marilyn got married and went up to, they might have got married when they were still in the band, I don't know, but they took off up to Salmon Arm to live, and it was a relief because they were sort of dragging our band down, and when we became a trio, we got a whole new life to us, and we went up to our first gig was up in the Bowler Room up at Squamish. The first gig as a trio I think it was called the Bowler Room. And I forgot to mention our tours that we went out. The first tour as a 5-piece was 1968. And the second tour we went out as a 3-piece was with Ron Graham as our manager, Ronnie Tomato, who I wrote the Ode to the Great Tomato for. I'll have to put that in a chapter. Anyway, that was 1970 when we went out in that time. And we used a tent to stay in, but I'll get into that later. So our first gig was in Squamish as a trio, and then we started rocking real good. I had double bass drums, and I also was learning at the same time. We moved from Texaco Drive, and we got this house in Burnaby on Patterson Avenue. It was I think we had a house right before that in Burnaby. I think it was on Imperial or Rumble or one of those streets. And it was a kind of a crappy house, but we moved in there. Vidar, I think, was still with the band when we moved in there from Texaco Drive. And we built a practice room downstairs and used old carpets and carpeted the whole room in to keep the noise down. And we used to go down there. It was so dusty in there. No light or nothing. But we used to go down there, and that was kind of a horrible house. And then we found this house. Ronnie Graham was managing us, I guess, at the time. He started managing us. And then we found a house called the Patterson House on Patterson Avenue, right across from Central Park in Burnaby. And those were my days. Boy, what a great time. I was like 23, in perfect shape. I was drumming all the time and eating health food, so I was nice and thin. And we were right across from the little par 3 at Central Park, and there was a lake in there and everything. I remember taking LSD once and going into the park. We used to go in and walk through. It was so nice to have that big park there. And then I remember looking at the lake, and actually looked like I could actually see the atoms in the lake, like on LSD is an unbelievable drug. I could see the sort of like, I guess, the molecules in the lake. It looked really neat anyway. So we used to go in there and hang out. It was really beautiful there. And I learned how to play the tabla and bayan, which were East Indian drums. There used to be a place called down on 4th Avenue and Burrard that was a health food store. I was really into health foods by then, from West, eating brown rice every day. I lived on brown rice. And I bought a set of these East Indian drums, and so I found out the guy from the Poppy Family, which was a famous band, in town, Terry Jacks, who later had the hit Seasons in the Sun. There are loud, da-da-da, the Seasons in the Sun. A million seller anyway. But before that, they were in the Poppy family, him and Susan Jacks. And this Craig McCaw from the old Shadracks in Kelowna or Penticton. And Satwat Singh was their drummer. He was an East Indian guy. He used to play tabla and bayan on stage. So I met him somehow, and I taught him how to play Western drums so he could play with the Poppy family on Western drums sometimes. And he taught me how to play tabla and bayan, and I used to sit down in our basement, Patterson Avenue, and practice on these things. But I went to his house a couple of times. He used to practice like 8 hours a day, that guy. He was so good on them, and he took lessons from Ravi Shankar's drummer over in India. He used to go back to India, and he had really super long hair, but he always had it in a turban, you know. I seen it down one time. I was so surprised. And the old Northwest Company house, we had a big, huge coal furnace down in the basement. We never lit it unless it got really cold out. We had a fireplace in the living room. We used to use it, but the coal furnace that house was always cold, but when we lit that furnace up, it had vents that went all through the house. It was just beautiful, nice. Its coal heat is so nice. But the coal, the next day you had to go down there and empty that coal furnace out. We used to have to take turns because that coal dust, God, it would get in your hair, all over your clothes. I think we used to put a scarf around our face or something. What a horrible job that was. But when it was going, it was fantastic. And we all had bedrooms in that house. I had my bedroom. I think I had really thick curtains. I had a purple bedspread. I had it all fixed up in there so good. And I would burn incense in there. And Ray had a room down the hall. And Gowan lived upstairs. And Ron lived upstairs. And we had this girl named Terry. I met her somewhere, maybe at Wreck Beach. She was like a super hippie. And she sort of moved up into the closet upstairs for a while. She used to walk around with no top on all the time in the house with her tits hanging out. I have a picture of her out in the front porch. But we used to go to Wreck Beach in those days, and I used to go there all the time. I went with 5 girls once, romping around, throwing the ball naked as, you know. It was Marshmallow, I think Lisa, maybe Jeannie, I can't remember, Janice. There was 5 girls, all I remember. I thought, it'll never get any better than this. And there used to be a place down in Kitsilano, I think it was on 4th Avenue, where Terry took me, called the Free Store, where they actually were drug dealers. They used to give me bags of, when they cut up bricks of hash, there would be all this powder left over, and they liked our band, so they'd give me a bag of powder to bring back to the band or some joints. And Terry lived there for when I first met her, and she was like super hippie. She was probably screwing all the guys there, who knows. I remember, anyway, they used to take a lot of LSD in that place. You know, one guy, he wrote all this stuff, you know, all over the walls in the bathroom. He would go in there, you know, on a trip for hours or something. And I remember having sex with Terry upstairs in her bed. She was like a little kitten. She'd sort of purr, and she always acted like she liked it so much. In fact, there was a little kid that used to hang around there that came in and actually watched us one day, but we had a cover over us, but he was sitting in the corner while we were going at it. Anyway, and they called themselves the Free Store, but it was, they had clothes and stuff there they gave away to people. It was kind of a funny place. Anyway, I can't remember what that kid's name was, but I didn't care at the time. We were so used to being naked and everything, it didn't matter. And I remember down the road from Patterson Avenue, we used to practice in the basement, the 3 of us. I'd go down there and beat the drums like crazy. And we used to practice down there. There was a Captain George's down the corner, further down, that served hamburgers just like White Spot, because Nat Bailey had sold White Spot and he started Captain George's for a while. So I think we used to go there. I didn't eat much meat, though, in those days. I quit eating meat for a couple of years, and I used to make these big pots of beans and stuff. I tried to make corn chowder once with this real hard dried corn. I cooked it for days, never got cooked down. Everybody used to eat it, beans and rice, because it was easy. But you couldn't leave anything in the fridge in that place because people would, if you had something nice like a cake and put it in the fridge, there were so many people coming over to our house all the time hanging around, it would disappear quick. But the Patterson Avenue property we had 2 lots there, and an old couple had lived there. It was a huge house with a big foundation, made of rocks, and a 2-story house. It had a shed in the back that used to keep garden stuff, but they had raspberries, cherry trees, apple trees, pear trees, plum trees, everything there, and it was double lots. So I remember laying out in the backyard with Lisa, my first wife, before she was my wife. She was only quite young then, 15, and we were laid out there naked. Ray O'Toole was the first one to get in her pants, though. Anyway, he was a real devil, that guy. He was our guitar player. I'll probably get in trouble for saying all this, and then down the street, Ronnie Graham was our manager. They used to get up and play darts every morning, and I remember Ronnie used to get up first, you see, and he'd make the coffee, and you could hear this. He'd always stick his spoon in the coffee, and ding, 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 ding. They're like a damn alarm clock. But it was a lot of fun there, and people would hang around that house a lot. It was like a family, And down the road, there was a couple of guys living down there, Jim Tomlinson and Herb Riddell. They lived down this road. And then this other guy moved in down the road, too, Scotty Bergstrom, who owned a company that promoted bands. And he booked us on a whole bunch of concerts because he used to be a concert promoter. And then there was a band way down Patterson on the other side called Motherhood. They were, seems to me I already told all these stories, but they were a kind of a hippie band too, but they got killed coming back on the freeway. There was actually a train crossing at Chilliwack on the freeway, and they were coming back late at night, and a train slammed into and killed a bunch of the members, the Sky family. They were called Motherhood. And but anyway, Scotty Bergstrom had Moose Valley Farms. It was he booked us with. He used to book Rita Coolidge and I forget a bunch of different bands. He booked us on the concerts with 10 Years After that we played in the Northwest Company. We played with 10 Years After. A bunch of different bands. Boz Scaggs. The Birds, we played with them out in Calgary with Seeds of Time and Fireweed were out there playing on the same show. We went on, Fireweed went on, that had Danny Tripper in it and Danny McGuinness. And then the Northwest Company went on, and Ray played this fiddle song he used to play. We used to play a kind of a hoedown fiddle song in one of the songs, and do the Dirty Boogie. We used to do the Dirty Boogie. That was one of our big songs. And then we went over so good, we got a big encore. Gowan told me that Rocket Norton from the Seeds of Time got all pissed off because they would cut into their time. Gowan said, well, you get an encore then. And Gowan was good that way. And then we were a trio. We went out on a road trip to Winnipeg once as the trio. And that's a whole story in itself out there because that's when we got our Garnett equipment. When we came back, we went to meet Garnett, and we had, that was 1970, went on that road trip. Ron Graham went with us, and we stayed in tents. And we had, I don't think we had roadies at that time, I can't remember. But we were a real hot trio, and I remember we camping out. I remember we smoked a bunch of pot one day, and there was a fence, and we could see the Mounties doing the Mountie ride. All we could see is their heads bobbing up and down around. But we would go way out when we were on a Winnipeg tour. We played Buffalo Days in Regina, too, and then we played a gig with the Guess Who at a concert. That's separate from the other time we went with the Guess Who out to a show they did, but we played a big festival out at some gravel pit out of Winnipeg. Guess Who were playing? But we played at the Buffalo Days in Regina, and we played a lot of big concerts with the Byrds, that one with the Byrds. But there was only Roger McGuinn from the Byrds left by that time, apparently. And then we went to, we played with Mash McCann, we played with Bachman Turner Overdrive up in Grand Prairie. It seems to me I told some of these stories, but anyway, I'm keeping going. So anyway, the Central Park thing, I always remember is West coming over and bringing his auto harp and putting it on the table and singing one of his songs like Waves, and the waves roll in. Man, it just floored me how good that song was. I ended up making a recording of it myself, but he was like a magic kind of a guy. And he would come to our house and he'd stay at our house for a while until Ron got mad at him, the manager. Tomato would get mad and kick him out. I always was the one that fought for him to stay there because he was a good influence, and we had a lot of fun. And then he would go stay with Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck Band for a while, and then he would go down to L.A. sometimes, and he'd go to San Francisco. He knew a lot of stuff about the States because he'd stay with Joni Mitchell, and he knew Steve Stills and from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. He knew a lot of people anyway. So, and then we had a cat named Meteor, and she had kittens, and now all of a sudden we had Meteor, Frankie, Wendell, I can't remember, and maybe one other one. It got deluged with cats anyway, too many damn cats. Go near the fridge, you got all these damn cats, and that Frankie used to go and pee on my damn curtains. I think I already told you about Marshmallow. We went hiking once at Lynn Valley, up the mountain there, and she was up ahead of me. She used to be so beautiful before I was going out with Lisa. And we called her Marshmallow because she looked so good. She had pretty nice tits and pretty shapely. She was hiking up me, and I could see her panties up. She had this little blue skirt on, her little dress. You know, I could see her panties. We went back to the house. We took acid, too. And then we went in my bedroom and started making love on acid, and it was such an experience. God, I could think of all these things about humans and sex and the smell of it, and I don't know, everything about it. It was unbelievable, and sure stuck in my mind. Anyway, there used to be a girl that hung around her house that wore earphones all the time, and she'd be singing in the living room. Like she couldn't sing with her damn. And we used to go down to Gastown. I already said that in the other part, but to the Anchor and the Gastown Inn. We'd go down with Ron in the van, and you had to go down the Anchor real early in Gastown because it was all lined up. It was full of people drinking like hippies and smoking dope and everything. So, and then we'd get all tanked up. I was drinking. I didn't drink much in those days. I was on health foods, but when I did drink, I was trying to drink stout or something. I remember it would get so ugh. And we used to drive back, and there used to be a pizza place. Ronnie used to sing, Verona pizza, have a pizza, Verona. We'd stop and get pizza. But the old Anchor, that was quite the joint. There was a lot going on in that place. I already told you about the gas mask at the Gastown Inn going around with the pot in it. One time we went on a tour up somewhere to Prince George or somewhere up there in our van with Ronnie Graham driving it, probably all drinking and smoking. We used to put our big Garnet speaker cabinets on the back of the floor of the van and then make it into like a bench seat back there and have, a bunch of quilts and everything on it and the amp heads and everything piled back there and drums and all this stuff. And we were going along. Ron was driving too fast, and we went off the road into the damn ditch in Alice Pass. There's a picture of the green van sitting in there somewhere. That's when I met, I used to go out with Terry that used to stay at the house. And that's one time at the house, we all got scabies. I don't know where they came from. They're horrible little things. You can't see them. You itch. And everybody got them. They spread all over the house, and then we would have to have a bath, and you put this stuff, Quilata or something, all over you. It would burn your balls and everything, and leave it on for 24 hours. You could smell it. You have to wash all your clothes and everything, and then wait for a couple of days. Then if you started itching again, you had to do it again. So everybody having them in the house and taking turns, we finally got rid of them, but gee. But that's when and there was a little house down at the corner. Used to be a flower shop. Lee Evans worked there, or she lived there, and a couple other girls lived there. There was it was the whole Patterson Avenue was like a bunch of little hippie houses. It was really neat, and we all used to visit. And girls would bake bread and bring it to the Northwest Company, and that's when I met my first wife, Lisa. I'd been going out with Terry for a while, but I don't know, I started catching too many diseases. That free love in those days, every time it seemed like we went to the clinic, we got gonorrhea once, something else, mono went around, and, I don't know, there was always something. So finally, anyway, Lisa was really nice, and she was clean, come from a good family, and she was Gowan's cousin, so that's how we started going out. Anyway, I'm going to go back, leave this for now, and come back to it.